T-minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Isn't it good to know that no matter where you are, you're covered? Covered by a company owned by Vincentions that understands your unique insurance needs. At Metrosint General Insurance Company, we've invested 50 years of service to guarantee that you have the peace of mind that you deserve. When it comes to motor vehicle, property, employer's liability, business insurance, and much more, we've got you covered. Our professional and friendly staff understands your needs and ensures you understand your options. Metrosint General Insurance Company.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to IKTV's program, Let's Get Down to Business. Let's Get Down to Business is a collaborative effort between IKTV and the Chamber of Industry and Commerce. I am going to introduce to you the topic and the panelists. Our topic for this evening's discussion is digital trade and e-commerce, and we're going to look at the readiness of our citizens to partake in that activity. On the panel, I have three knowledgeable people. Mr. Joel Richards, he's Vincentian. He's not been living with us for a while, but he's connected, I would say, Joel. Joel is a senior technical specialist for trade for the OECS Commission in Geneva. Joel is actually past his bedtime. They're 6 hours ahead, so I have to give him a special welcome and a special thank you for joining us tonight. Then Ms. Charmin Powell. She's the chairperson of the FinTech Working Group for the East Caribbean Central Bank. We're going to hear from Charmin, especially on matters of Gcash, which is a product that the East Caribbean Central Bank has launched in some markets in the OECS. And our third guest is Mr. Karim Geese. He's the head of the OECS, well, he's the head of the competitive business unit for the economic division of OECS Commission. So, and of course, my co-host, Maurice Franklin, she's with us and she's gonna help me to guide this program through for the next hour and a half. Folks, welcome. It's quite a long introduction. I'm very happy to have you here. Our topic, of course, is digital trade and e-commerce, and it's a topic that more and more people are tuning into. We've got a situation here on the ground in St. Vincent where, on top of the COVID pandemic, we've had a volcanic eruption. There are people in shelters, and it's very inconvenient to move cash around at this point or to trade in cash. And so this topic is very timely. I want to just throw out to the panel so that you can enlighten our viewers. Maybe just tell us, Joel, I'll start with you. What really, when we talk about digital trade and e-commerce, what are we talking about?
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. Good evening to fellow panelists, co-moderator, and of course to all viewers. And I'll start by just saying it's very good to be home, albeit virtually. Now, direct to your question in terms of what is e-commerce, what is digital trade. Broadly speaking, when we refer to e-commerce, we're talking about the production, the distribution, the sale, the marketing of goods and services using electronic means. Now, when we talk about digital trade or the digital economy, which is a much broader concept, we are talking about other things such as, for example, there's this notion of the Internet of Things. And here we are talking about how different technologies interact, how we are able to integrate machine learning as an example. We are also talking about things like the integration of robotics into our everyday life, into production, into manufacturing, into service delivery, as an example. We are talking about digital financial solutions. So the digital economy is a much broader concept than e-commerce, and encompasses even a wide range of activities that we see every day, but sometimes we take for granted. So that's pretty much a very broad idea of what would encompass e-commerce and the digital economy.
So give us an idea of how huge, in terms of quantifying it in money terms. What is the global amount that's traded? Using digital trade and e-commerce. What's that figure looking like?
Okay, well, as of right now, the value of global e-commerce to global GDP, it's over $25 trillion US, and it's growing. And even in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, e-commerce is actually one of those sectors of the economy that continue to grow, even as other sectors of the economy went into decline. If we're talking about the wider Latin American and the Caribbean region, we are talking about roughly 120 billion US dollars in terms of the value of e-commerce and digital trade to those economies. And you had a period between 2017 and this year, 2021, where the value of e-commerce in the economies of Latin America and the Caribbean actually doubled. So, like I said, we have a global figure of over 25 trillion, and we have a Latin American Caribbean figure of roughly 120 billion US dollars. And this is in itself suggests that we are barely scraping the bottom of the barrel in Latin America and the Caribbean when you look at our figures in the context of the overall global picture.
And I suppose if you further broke that out, if you disaggregated that to look at
for the Caribbean,
OECS or CARICOM, you find even it's a much smaller figure than
much more. Yes, much more minuscule. And one of the challenges we have is that we are not as good as we need to be in terms of data collection. And so that's a perennial challenge that we have faced. But what I would also want to add is that when you look at the global figures, there are about 4 countries that pretty much account for the bulk of the activities that we see in e-commerce. We're talking about the United States, China, Japan, Korea, and to a lesser extent, the UK and several other countries in the European Union. So it's very uneven in terms of the extent to which countries are able to benefit fully from e-commerce and digital trade.
So I'm going to ask Karim and Sharman to come in on that point. You talk about the 4 countries, those big blocks, trading blocks, and the unevenness, but does that also have to do with market size? I mean, just sheer numbers of people. Isn't that one of the actual physical size of the market? Karim or Sharman, if you want to comment.
Sure. Thank you, Tony, and good evening to our listeners, both in St. Vincent and across the Caribbean. The point Joel is making is quite valid, and when you speak about business penetration, I think volume plays a critical role. And to your point, when you think about the sheer number of people that exist within these trade blocks, it gives you a sense of what is the opportunity for the Caribbean states, and specifically those of the OECS. when you think about the work that the OECS Commission is doing and what the intentions are, I think we need to also appreciate what are the numbers we're working with, what type of cost we may want to consider for a cost structure. Because whilst you're excited about the e-commerce space and digitizing an economy, we need to also recognize that there is a significant cost that is required to help move that dial. I would say from 0 to 10, for example. So in our work, we kind of want to always continue, being a champion for facilitating, for example, finance mechanisms. We are now looking at a conversation around how can we generate and increase conversations around new forms of finance and sustainable finance, which is a critical element of driving e-commerce. So it is outside of just the idea of being able to create a website and allow our customers to have that full access to our services and our products from across anywhere in the global space. But these websites need to have the technological advancement that is allowing them to be able to trade across the space. And I think when we speak about the OECS MSME space and the idea of a global reach, I think another piece of the conversation has to be around how do we enhance capacity through ensuring that the regulations that we use across the Caribbean can merge across one, the European space, two, the United States space, and of course across Asia. And to Joe's point, when you actually carve out these 4 countries, some persons within the Caribbean might say, well, boy, do we really have an opportunity to land e-commerce across our space? And I think the answer is yes, simply because it is a matter of trying to seemingly and easily kind of carve out your speciality. And I don't believe that the Caribbean is in a space where it intends to take the entire hog of the overall commercial space and the overall e-commerce space. But I think if we can create some differentiating factors within the Eastern Caribbean member states, first of all, and of course extensively through CARICOM, I think we'll be able to become very good at what we do and be able cohesively and with cooperation, we can become a better force and possibly have a seat at the table where e-commerce and digitization is concerned.
Charmin, I know that the East Caribbean Central Bank is particularly adopting sort of strategies that will make it, as you're an economic gatekeeper for the OECS and for the OECS currency union. And I know you've definitely gone within the last 3 or so years on a path that incorporates the whole question of e-commerce, digital trade within your strategy at the bank. I don't know if you want to expand on that. What's the role of the central bank in facilitating generally? I know you have your Dcash product, and we'll talk about that later, but I just, would like to hear in general terms how you see yourselves fitting into that space.
Well, one of the things, good evening to you and good evening to all listeners. One of the things that we are keen about is about competitiveness across the region and innovation. And that was actually one of the driving forces behind Dcash, because it's not about just among ourselves, as the other panelists have said, but it's also about branching out. So we see ourselves as looking at how we can make the region more competitive. How can we be more innovative? And so in introducing Dcash, that's one of the things we thought about, because even though the pilot is only addressing payments within the ECCU, it is our goal ultimately to also facilitate cross-border transactions. Because if you're gonna promote e-commerce and want to go outside the ECCU region in terms of marketing our goods and services, then we would need to be able to facilitate those cross-border transactions. And so it's a long-term vision that we have. But I also think even beyond that, though, we also have to look at our distribution channels, because of course we can have the goods and services, but we have to be able to now get them to our buyers. So it doesn't make any sense to market goods to the US and the UK, but your distribution channel are sufficiently mature that you can get the goods out there. And now that speaks to the whole cost factor. Can you be competitive? Because what is the cost of getting your goods and services to these individuals at a competitive price? So I think it's a number of things that we have to take into consideration when we're looking at e-commerce in the Caribbean and broaden it outside the ECCU and the Caribbean region.
So we are going to look at 6 particular pillars as we progress through this program, which will address some of the things that you have mentioned, and I did say Joel and Karim. But keeping it still general for a little while longer, how do you see e-commerce being a disruptor, if you want, in terms of emerging entrepreneurial activity? And by that, I mean not the traditional stuff. Young entrepreneurs getting into activity hitherto that were not part of the mainstream in terms of business. Does an e-commerce platform and an e-commerce enabling environment, does that accelerate it? Does that support it? Is that something that will give it the oomph? And again, I throw that out to anybody who wants us to jump in.
Well, one of the things I think I've seen, particularly this COVID-19 environment, which is something that is becoming more and more popular, are these virtual events. I think e-commerce is very important in able to have these virtual events. You're able to actually pay online to see a virtual event. And I think we've seen a lot more of that happening. So this sort of innovation, I think, can come out of the e-commerce, the thrust for e-commerce, because then you can offer practically any service to a wide number of patrons. And because of the e-commerce functionality, you can actually gain income from it. So I think the whole idea of COVID-19 and the other restrictions that we have currently are causing persons to become more innovative, and the e-commerce is an enabler for all of this.
So, Karim,
if I may add,
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Joel.
No, I just wanted to add quickly to what Charmaine is saying, because Charmaine has used a term a few times when she's taken the floor, and that is innovation. And that's a very critical concept, especially in our part of the world, because e-commerce, it's actually the next frontier with respect to global economic development. Now, when you look at traditional models of development over the years, so we moved from agrarian societies, and then came that first industrial age, then we transitioned to services-based economies and so forth. But what traditionally has happened over the years is that the Caribbean, small island developing states, have generally lagged behind other countries with respect to development. If we are to seize what e-commerce does, it presents us with an opportunity to really leapfrog with respect to our own economic development. But that's not going to just come by the way or by chance. It takes creating an innovation ecosystem, an e-commerce and digital trade ecosystem that can facilitate entrepreneurs, micro, small, and medium enterprises. And because what e-commerce also does is that sectors and individuals and businesses that traditionally have also been marginalized over the years. For instance, there are many persons who are traders, but they might be unbanked. And what e-commerce does through financial solutions that might become available is that it brings them into some sort of the mainstream. I mentioned the whole issue of data and the paucity of data in our part of the world. And part of that is because many of our business persons also operate very informally. And so we are not able to capture what they do. And because we are not able to capture, it means that the policies that we create to respond to some of the needs that we see would always be inadequate because we never have the full picture. And so we can use e-commerce in a way that allows us to really try and resolve many of these deficiencies that we have in our business environment as well. So I just wanted to make that point very quickly to supplement what Charmaine was saying.
Maurice, of course, Maurice is the young girl person on our room tonight, and of course I know, Maurice, you would jump in at any time you want to ask our panel questions, especially as it relates to how the young people see, and probably getting very impatient with the pace at which they're able to convert to digital transactions. So I'm just telling you, Maurice, feel free to jump in at any time. So Karim, yes, I was just saying, where you sit with the competitive business unit, surely the idea of wealth creation and job creation is something that is an imperative for the OECS countries, and especially when it comes to youth unemployment. Does e-commerce provide a platform to help us forge solutions to this issue?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, again, it's a matter of reach, right? And Joel mentioned the idea of data. And once you start to understand what data does and what type of information it provides to you, and the ability to analyze truly how your demand side and supply side reaches an equilibrium, I think as an entrepreneur, you now have an ability to understand not just the market that is in front of you in your physical space, for example, in St. Vincent or in Dominica or in Grenada, or across the rest of our regions, but it allows you to understand what is it that a possible customer is looking for within the European space. And do I have the ability, for example, to provide a service or a product that can meet that demand specs of that customer, right? So, truly, I think if we're intending to grow the employment base across our Caribbean islands, I think we are moving away from the brick and mortar employment conversation, and generally speaking about innovation and development of a technology advanced space for our young entrepreneurs to become upskilled, to become better at what they do with regards to driving the force of technology. And that is the work that we have been carrying out. When donor agencies, for example, fund projects specifically to do with, for example, digitizing an economy, capacity building becomes a very, very important component of that discussion. And we need to ask ourselves, are we really training up our youth right now, through the primary school, through secondary, through college? Are they really being trained up specifically to simply get a job, or are they being trained up to become better skilled to take on the opportunities that exist in the current global climate? And I don't think any one of us here during the pandemic would have left our houses to carry out meaningful transaction. And I think it's as a result of an e-commerce platform worldwide. We were able to sit at home, click, make a payment, and receive goods and services from anywhere in the world. So I think with that advent of access, the ability for our MSMEs to provide services and goods and put them on the World Wide Web through an innovative portal, and the ability for them to meet the demand of our customers, I think is exactly where the conversation must go. And that is where a lot of the work that the competitive business unit has been doing. In fact, a lot of the teams that we are working with right now are focusing on developing what you call digitization of marketing plans. Because the traditional marketing plan would speak to a brick and mortar conversation. How do we create billboards, and how do we allow customers who are walking by the street to be pulled into our stores? Right now, we are looking at the understanding of how data can drive one customer who may have stopped onto your website, and tomorrow, how can you now get back that customer who might be surfing on CNN to be able to buy your goods and service from you? So marketing intelligence, artificial intelligence is playing a very, very critical role in the development. And I think in order for us to be able to take advantage, then training, capacity building in technologically advanced and innovative ideas must be the pillar for focus.
Maurice, I mean, you associate with people far younger than I do, and what's the conversation among your peers when it comes to this whole question of e-commerce and its reach?
In terms of the reach, I do think it's very broad. I can say I'm fully for it, and yes, you are right. We are impatient, especially when it comes to trying to do transactions at home. Here in St. Vincent, it's still very difficult. We do have some people that have come on stream with some really good products and services, like the eShopper platform, eShopper.bc, and other persons that are doing their best to make it easy. But we do have our traditional businesses, like for instance, our credit unions that, you still have to go and you have to line up and you have to make your payments, and it's very inconvenient. But another point that's really important for us is like being able to accept payments, especially if you have like a small business, but say you've suddenly, maybe you've done something and it's gone viral and people are really interested in your product now, and then you're finding out that, okay, I'm having difficulty getting my product to persons because, well, I can't accept payments, or I can't do this, or, because the environment isn't there.
So we have two comments in the chat, Maurice. I don't know if you want to pull them up and read them.
Just before that, Tony,
go ahead,
I'm very excited to hear Maurice, because that is exactly what Dcash is expected to bring to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where persons who have these small businesses can accept payments in 5 seconds. They can advertise their stuff on their website or online, and then there's an opportunity for them. We have an e-commerce platform embedded in Dcash where they can actually accept payments online. So I'm very excited to hear that the market is ready for that.
And I promise you, Shaman, we're going to spend a little time in this program to talk a bit more about your product, about Dcash. So you're certainly going to have your say. Maurice?
So the comments, actually, well, there was just a comment from Tan TV about e-commerce helping the small business sector. And the other comment is, I'm assuming they're talking about Dcash or e-commerce, because they're saying it's a major solution when it comes to creating employment. There are young people with skills that are of service online, however, getting paid in this Stone Age banking system in place locally and regionally is holding back progress for future entrepreneurs. Because we for me, like, I'm a very I consider myself a techie, We grew up with our Instagram and our Facebook, and that's what we use to promote our products. We use our personal accounts to get things out there. We're not looking at billboards and, let me put an ad in paper. So,
Tony, if I may,
the landscape is changing. Yes, Trevor, you go ahead.
Yes, because I'm a bit energized by the comments by Maurice, and I think the last commenter on the panel on the question segment. Because I'm a millennial, so I still moonlight as a young man from time to time.
That's good to know.
So I'm also part of that tech generation as well. But I just want to share some of the experiences I've had since I've been in Geneva, because I can sense the frustration coming through from the last person who commented in terms of what he refers to as some of these Stone Age processes that we still have to contend with. I do all of my banking from my mobile phone, and that includes making international wire transfers, which I do monthly. I haven't been into a bank in over a year, and I haven't needed to, because everything is on my phone. The bank has its apps, and they're different, and everything is secure because you have to authenticate. You can't just get into my app, even if my phone is stolen, facial recognition and all of that. And there's an app called Twint that is very popular throughout Switzerland, and every bank pretty much subscribes to it. And when I go to the barber, I can pay my barber through Twint. When I go to the gym, I can pay my trainer using Twint. So I hardly ever handle cash. I don't carry cash around.
So clearly, Joel, your barber and your gym trainer is also, part of the platform, part of
exactly
accessing that means.
Yes, and that's why the ecosystem approach is so important, because it cannot be a piecemeal approach. It has to be an approach that incorporates all layers of society. And so I see e-commerce as part of democratizing access, economic access and economic success for entrepreneurs, for individuals as well. And of course, it makes our lives so much easier, but the ecosystem has to be in place, meaning that it's not just a problem for the government to solve, but the private sector as well has to be on board. The traditional banking institutions have to be on board as well, because sometimes that's where you can find the frustration. so that if the banks haven't yet figured out how to incorporate the technology into their daily operations, you can have what might be an effect of disrupting a technology that is meant to disrupt in a positive way. And you can have a negative disruption coming from the other direction if there's a lack of understanding in terms of how the technology works and how transformative it can be. And so that's why everyone has to really be on board. It has to be a root and branch process that leaves no stone unturned.
And Joel, with that, we getting some more comments in the chat, but I have to go on a break. So when we come back, we'll take a couple of comments in the chat, and we'll try to look at the pillars in this ecosystem that you're talking about. We'll try to look at the pillars with some sort of depth to see where our gaps are, the importance of them, and where the gaps are. So let's go to a break.
Isn't it good to know that no matter where you are, you're covered? Covered by a company owned by Vincentions that understands your unique insurance needs. At Metrosint General Insurance Company, we've invested 50 years of service to guarantee that you have the peace of mind that you deserve. When it comes to motor vehicle, property, employer's liability, business insurance, and much more, we've got you covered. Our professional and friendly staff understands your needs and ensures you understand your options. Metrosint General Insurance Company.
And we are back with Let's Get Down to Business. We're having quite a lively discussion. Our panel, let me remind you, is Ms. Charming Powell from the East Caribbean Central Bank, Mr. Joel Richards, he is a trade specialist with the OECS in Geneva, and Mr. Karim Geese, who is the head of the Competitive Business Unit, OECS. My co-host is Maurice Franklin. Maurice, I don't know if you want to start out by let's see what comments we have there in the chat.
So we have a comment from Josh Mounsey. He says, I also believe in SVG, wire transfer of money is inefficient. Most people probably do not use Venmo or PayPal. There's a big environmental concern where coins are still being used. And we have a thank you for Joel from Galaxy by Far for your wealth of knowledge and saying that the discussion has been long overdue.
So good. We're happy that we have people contributing through the chat, and let me encourage anybody who's listening, looking to continue to do that. You are very much part of this discussion. The infrastructure for e-commerce, infrastructure and accessibility. And by that, I mean internet connectivity, pricing, affordability, broadband penetration, penetration of devices, IT skills, and availability of skilled contractors. Just how important are these? And basically, how wide are these gaps? For this pillar I'm talking about, the ICT infrastructure. Karim, you might want to kick off here.
Sure. Thanks, Tony. So, you raise an important point in, the conversation regarding to access. And I think, in the Eastern Caribbean, I think we are still plagued with the access to broadband, internet. And I've worked for two of the leading telecom providers, and I know that from the provider side, there is significant work being carried out to ensure that, the last mile solution of internet capacity is reaching these customers. But I think there's also a conversation with regards to affordability and what we think affordability is. We have moved through the advent of the fixed internet accessibility and now through to the mobile phone, which is where most of our e-commerce transactions are taking place. The reality is I would love to not have to walk into any business place to transact. any business activity, simply because of the freedom it gives you, the ability to not be bogged down or having to change your day's plan to carry out the seamless activity. And I think a lot of times is not just not having accessibility from data, since we are at least well over 100% penetration in smartphone usage in the Eastern Caribbean. We are also well over 100% in terms of access to data. I mean, we can argue the point that what is the average rate for 1 megabyte, and in whether or not the affordability factor is in the positive realm or the negative realm. But I think if we were to switch the conversation and go alongside on the left-hand side of the spectrum, the question is, do we have the platforms that are making it even, the ability for the demand for data? Because there's one conversation to say, no, yes, we have access to data, but what are you using that data for? And I think the last comment by Josh, was it, who spoke about the access to infrastructure. I think there's a conversation of trust. A lot of times, I think when people hear the names of Vimo and they hear PayPal, I think in the Caribbean specifically, there is a conversation of legality and a conversation of trust that I think we need to tap into. So I'm not even going to comment on what the infrastructure could look like, because I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. What I think we need to do is to continue the conversation of trust and open that conversation to enlighten our entire populace, our entire entrepreneurship population, our MSMEs, to start thinking about transacting business in a much more simpler manner, in a much more easy manner that will allow them, so both consumer and the provider, to be able to have a seamless transaction, possibly getting around some of the barriers that exist for doing business in the region. I think e-commerce creates such an exciting platform for any person to begin a business and to transact and to feel that freedom of not having to go through our commercial banking space, and not to knock my friend at ECCB at all, since you're within the financial space. But what I'm saying is, I think some of our banks need to also come online with us and drive the conversation of that readiness, because I think a lot of our banks are still archaic in the way that we do business. And I think, to be fair to the banks themselves, I think there's a matter of cost. When you look at and we started the conversation with regards to penetration, what is the population mass, across our region vis-a-vis what exists in Europe, what exists in North America, what exists in South America. I don't think the South America architecture of economy is not so far developed than our Eastern Caribbean regions. What I think works for them is the fact that they have a larger mass of people on a daily basis transacting, and that gives it an edge with a management of cost. So Tony, I think great on the infrastructure, and I'm not an expert on infrastructure development. I think where my mind is always at is, how are we helping the medium-sized, small micro businesses to become nimble, to be able to move very quickly, and to compete not within the Caribbean space and not within their national space, but to compete across the shores. And by giving them the policy platform that allows for seamless transactions in the region.
So
well, thank
Tony,
you for
if I
that.
may.
But yes, Shannon. So I was going to ask you if you're seeing cost as a factor. Cost of access.
Cost of access, I think, is indeed a factor, because even though these studies have shown that we have over 100% penetration in terms of mobile devices across all the ECCU countries, in terms of the number of persons who has ready access to data, it is much less, and that's because of the cost factor. And as Karim spoke, I think it's like a chicken and egg situation, because yes, we need to empower our businesses to be able to offer e-commerce, but you don't want them to be empowered and then they get on that road and then the infrastructure is not there to support it, because then you have persons being frustrated. So, I mean, you have first something, you go to a business establishment and you want to pay with a credit card, and then you hear there's no internet, the internet just went down, and you're left in a bind. So I think it's important that they go together, because you don't want to develop your e-commerce sector, but the infrastructure that supports it is not there, because then you're going to end up in a situation where you have frustrated customers. I think we need to have the conversation on both ends, both in terms of the quality of the infrastructure, the reach of it, and then the cost. how do you make it more affordable so that when you actually reach out to all these customers, because the whole idea is to have e-commerce across the ECCU to every single household. But then when you get to these customers, can they afford to the data plans, the Wi-Fi plans to be able to use e-commerce? And can the underlying infrastructure that you have support all this e-commerce business that you're trying to promote? So I think it has to be a collaborative effort and a parallel conversation in that regard.
Joel, where are you seeing the gaps?
Okay,
under this pillar.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and thanks, Tony. And what I would say though is that over the years we've made some significant strides with respect to addressing our infrastructure gaps, but there's still a significant amount of work that still has to be done. Because, for example, in the last 10, 15 years, we've been able to roll out fiber optic infrastructure, for example, and that's really improved the quality and consistency of access to the internet, but quality is still not where it needs to be. Okay, so I would say that. And cost is one factor. Cost is a gap that has to be addressed, but the cost is also a function of small market spaces as well. So that, because what tends to happen is that when companies invest, they need to recoup that investment. And in a small market, it means that the cost per consumer is going to be much higher than in a market of over 100 million people. So that's just one reality of small island developing states that it's very difficult to get around that.
Isn't the technology getting cheaper though? Isn't it getting
technology
cheaper?
is getting cheaper,
yeah.
To a large extent, yes. But there are certain dynamics when you're operating in small markets where cost is concerned, and even in terms of the logistics as well, because not all technology can just be transferred by cyberspace. The hard infrastructure still has to come,
correct,
right? And then the logistic costs have to be factored into that as well, right? But I have some figures I just want to share very quickly, because across the OECS region, broadband costs, it ranges from between $15 to $28 for a 500 megabyte plan. That's probably going to last a day. Depends on what you're going to be doing with that.
You're talking about the OECS, or you're talking about Caribbean?
You're talking about the OECS.
Okay.
And St. Vincent actually is not doing too badly, because the lowest costs are actually in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But there are other dynamics that are operating in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. For example, per capita income issues. So even though you are being charged $15 for 500 megabytes on average, there might be less latitude in terms of purchasing power, right? So that is going, and I'm going to share some figures in terms of the broadband penetration that is going to, you're going to see how that plays out. And in Dominica, it's about $28 for a 500 megabyte plan. Again, that's going to be out of reach for the average individual who makes much less than $28 a day. Now, in terms of actual broadband penetration, so yes, we have probably 100% mobile phone coverage across our islands, but that doesn't necessarily translate into broadband access. So globally, the average is about 60% of people who have access to the internet globally. And we have several OECS countries that are actually performing at above the global average. So for example, Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica and St. Kitts and Nevis are over 70%. St. Kitts and Nevis is actually at 81%. But we have Grenada, which is pretty much at the global average, so they are at about 59%. But then we have St. Lucia, which is operating at 51% of broadband penetration. And then we have St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is very far behind at 21%. So notwithstanding the fact that we have the lowest cost rates in terms of the megabytes per megabyte for data, we still have the lowest penetration rates, okay? So that is problematic. That's a major gap that has to be fixed. And even in those countries like St. Kitts and Nevis, where penetration is high, it's at 81%, it still comes back to what are you doing with the access that you have to the internet? Is it being used for...
And there are quality issues as well.
And there would be quality issues.
Which is a major factor. So you can have access, you can afford it, but if what you're paying for is rubbish, then you have another problem.
Yes, and part of the challenge and part of the disappointment for me as well, because there's this idea, there's this theory that the smaller the state, the better it is in terms of being a test bed for innovation and being a test bed for pretty much certain types of activities to take place. Because you'd think that in a small market, you're perfect as a case study to test some of the technologies that are emerging and so forth. But we haven't been able to make that transition, and it goes back to the ecosystem that I was speaking about, because we have not yet done the fundamentals that are required to create an ecosystem that is going to incentivize the private sector that's here now, and even investors that might be looking for places to test their technology and roll out their technology. The ecosystem is really just not there. And the final thing I would say, which is also very critical to the infrastructure issue, is the reliability of electricity as well. Because without a stable and reliable supply and cost-effective supply of electricity, the infrastructure gap is not going to be closed. So that's another thing we have to look at. And that's where we now have to start thinking about how do we diversify away from even fossil fuels in terms of how we integrate it into our electrical grid and look at renewable options and so forth, because electricity is extremely critical, because if the power goes, then your internet goes. And that in itself is also a national security concern that countries would have to certainly be interested in addressing as well.
You're preempting the topic for one of my future programs, which will have to do with energy and alternative energy.
Tony,
yes,
if
Sharon.
I may, hearing Joel speak about all the challenges that we have, I think what it also speaks to is the need for collaboration. Because if everybody wants to do their own little thing in their own little corner, and we have an issue of size, then this is going to be a continuous issue. So I think what we need to also look at is how can we collaborate in specific areas so that we can move it along and not be so competitive at all times. Some things are for competition, but other things are for collaboration. And if you're going to move forward as a region and really advance to the stage we want to advance to, we have to collaborate more. We have to remove all these silos and recognize that we can compete, but we also can collaborate. And at the end of the day, we're all better off for it.
In fact, if I may jump in, Charmin, you raise a good point, because we are actually working on an intervention for the manufacturing sector across the region, and we are going to begin hosting dialogues with them at the end of the month. And one of the key conversations that our team had been discussing over the last weeks, it's about cooperation. And I think a lot of times we think competition means, or I think we believe that partnership means no competition, and vis-a-vis competition means no partnership. And I think we need to break the back of that conversation and realize that because we are so small and it's where we are at this point, I think if we put our minds together and be able to, become more cooperative in our conversations and be more willing to share the information that we have that can help us to grow our infrastructure, grow our ecosystem, discuss challenges together, come together and negotiate together. And I know obviously our OECS member states, we do very well with certain areas of cooperation, but I think where we fail sometimes is the actual firms that exist within the ecosystem. So an institution is great in cooperation and partnership and enhancement and capacity building, but the beneficiaries of these very projects, I don't think they are at the stage where are mature enough to begin understanding that being a competitor does not necessarily mean we cannot speak about a unified front and a unified focus and a unified strategy. So as I said, one of the key interventions that we're going to start taking on is how can we become more cooperative within the competitive space and becoming more strategic, as to how we roll out our own individual business operations. Because Joel is right. You cannot expect to get the benefits you want simply because you feel, well, it's a smaller island and as such, well, there might be less work to roll out technology. Actually, no, that's not the case. Because you're dealing with, as I mentioned before, in fact, you cannot benefit from economies of scale because you have a very small population base, one. Then you have an even smaller sector within that population that is willing to take a chance and willing to take the risk of transacting or changing the traditional dialogue of transactions to the digital space and the digital economy. I mean, we have been talking about digitizing the Eastern Caribbean at least now for about 10
Quite a
years.
while. Quite a while.
And like Joel, I think I can still talk about being within the young space, right? And the reality is, I think what you have is a nice mix of brain power. Whereas we are sitting on these committees where you might think, well, boy, the conversation has been going on for 10 years, but we're now bringing that new energy to say, look what, guys, okay, we get it, 10 years. Can we now help? Can we now bring in the minds that are actually utilizing the services and benefiting from the services and are willing to be excited of the actual, returns of these services? Because when you begin to invest into a business, I don't know that you invest into simply have fun, right? The intention is you want to make money. And you want to break down all barriers that exist within the space to be able to become better at what you do. So, from my end, I will say that, we are going to give this a good shot this year to help within the cooperative space, to help within the capacity enhancement space, and to help within getting global partners who can help us to understand what challenges existed when they kicked off these very technologically advanced innovations, and how can we learn from them to help us within our Eastern Caribbean space.
And how can we implement solutions more to the point? Before I move on to the next pillar, I don't know if Maurice, you want to jump in on anything here. You're not in here. So let's move to the logistics and delivery. For goods to move around, it's one thing being able to purchase them online. But what about the delivery? What about that little part of the ecosystem? Well, it's not little, but that important part of the ecosystem that needs to be functioning equally at the same level of your infrastructure. Joel, where are we with logistics and delivery?
Good question, Tony, and that's another vital pillar. And I know Charmaine had made reference to logistics earlier in the presentation as well. But what I would say is that, so yes, we are small, and we are, in terms of distance to market, we have some issues there. Even trading among ourselves, sometimes to move goods between maybe Dominica and Grenada, for example, or St. Vincent, don't be surprised if you need to go through Miami and come back down. But I know that all of our countries, about 5 years ago, signed and then subsequently ratified the World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement. And the idea behind that agreement was really to create a better, a more enabling environment for goods to move in and out of our borders. And I know a number of countries are undertaking reforms in that regard.
But it's moving slow, Joel. I have to say, right, because I've been part of these conversations as well.
Right.
And I'm almost forgetting what I discussed 2 years ago.
Right. And I was coming to that point as well, because we don't have the luxury of time, to be honest with you, because the world is moving so quickly, right? And technology becomes obsolete the moment it's released. It becomes almost obsolete because something else that's better is coming behind. So when Apple, for example, releases a phone in September of every year, by the following year, everybody is clamoring for a new phone because it comes in with something new, offering you something not more novel than the year before. And so we don't have the luxury of time. And when reforms take too long, it then defeats the purpose of the very reforms we are trying to implement. Correct. Because by the time you get to the stage of implementing those reforms, it means that the world has moved on, and you have a new set of, and so even in terms of even enhancing the overall business environment, there are certain things that we have to do domestically across the OECS region with respect to trade logistics, customs, operations, and those sort of things. There's absolutely no reason why in the 21st century, you need to go and stand in line at any customs in this region and go to 6 and 7 windows. You spend the entire day, lose an entire day of productivity just to clear an item. that makes absolutely no sense. And
So Joel,
Mhm.
I know I'm interrupting you, but I'm wanting to pick up this point, particularly the custom single window, because I know that is part of the WTO trade facilitation push. And I've been in these conversations, I said 2 years. It's more than two because I've been traveling for the last 2 years because of COVID anyway. So that dates that easily, 3 years ago. And I don't think we've made any progress. And I'm
It's been
worried.
slow. It's been much slower than it should be. And when we talk about business reform, and when we talk about being able to turn our economies around, those are fundamentals. Those to me would be low-hanging fruits that you need to look at, because time is money, as they say. And in a context where every delay in a process, there's a cost, and ultimately the consumer bears that cost. So even no matter how much access you have to the internet, no matter how many persons are clamoring to buy your goods and serve your goods online, if your basic infrastructure in terms of your logistics infrastructure are not aligned, then it sort of defeats the purpose almost of you being able to use the various e-commerce platforms to increase your business, because those delays, those bottlenecks with respect to logistics and trade facilitation, it's going to increase the cost to the consumer as well. And that consumer would go elsewhere where they can pay less. Okay, so that's why we need to fix those low-hanging fruits that we have. To me, I don't think that they're as difficult. The technologies exist to solve a lot of the bottlenecks that we have. We just need to be a lot more deliberate, move with deliberate haste in terms of resolving those issues.
And if I may, Karim, let me bring you in here. Let's look at cross-border issues in relation to things like information and VAT and other taxes. If I'm moving my goods into another market, I'm going across that border, I need to know, even before I move, I need to have data, I need to have information, I need to know what to expect to speed up the process. How is the competitive business unit addressing bolstering the ecosystem in that sense?
Well, Tony, it seems as if you're part of our work plan strategy sessions. So one of the main objectives that we have as the competitive business unit is to provide a platform for the access of data. And I am a stickler for real-time data and data that is valid and data that can be utilized. So we are in the throes of I guess re-enabling a data platform that is going to provide a host of competitive data information that can help each business carry out the operations, and it will span from understanding each island's custom operations, custom tariffs, understanding competitive landscape for businesses that exist across the region. So as an entrepreneur, you are able to go onto the platform to pull data that will help you to make informed decisions. Joel mentioned the idea of cost. Every time you miss a logistical period, you're incurring costs. But in fact, that cost that you're incurring is just making you more uncompetitive. In fact, the customers are not even having a conversation with you because you have missed that boat.
What's the time frame on your data platform?
I don't want to give you a date that I don't want you to come back to me. But what I would say is we are already discussing with consultants about the enhancement factor of that platform. There is a current platform that exists within our ecosystem. And what we want to do, as I said, is to make it more readily available to the scale of entrepreneurs that exist. For example, the most simplistic data source that you would want vis-a-vis the most complicated. So what we have right now, I feel, is one that does not allow for an ease of access within an easier way to navigate. And we are going to enhance that, and we are having a conversation with the consultants. We have already gone through, that ecosystem, breaking it apart, and literally writing down every single item that we believe would assist within the ecosystem of the trade enhancement across the Caribbean. So we are going to have a consultation. We're going to ask MSMEs, what do you want to see from this data platform? What would help you become much quicker to market? What will help you to become better at logistics? And we're going to work together with our partners, both donor partners, both MSME partners, and our internal teams to enhance the data aspect of our platform at this point.
Let me just ask one more question on this, Bill, because we really must push on. The time is galloping on us. The customs departments across the OECS, are all of them running the same version of ICQ? That's just a simple question.
I don't know I'm in a position to answer that question. What I can say is I think at least the fact that all customs across the Caribbean region are on the Akodi system at least tells you that we are within an integration frame. And I know, Joel, maybe you can correct me, but I think about 5 or 6 years ago, they had gone through that process of merging the integration plan for customs across the region. And I think the intention was to have seamless logistics and seamless operations. So Tony, if they do not have the same version today, what you know is that at least the same system applies across the region.
Well, that's encouraging. That's encouraging. Now let's move quickly on. We're talking about these pillars, and we're looking now at citizenship readiness of our citizens for e-commerce. I know Charmin spent quite a bit of time in her opening, part of the conversation talking about capacity building for businesses, raising awareness and knowledge about existing opportunities, education on e-commerce in learning institutions, generally raising consumer awareness and integrating e-commerce in existing trade promotion activities. So I just pull those bullet points out from that pillar. And I'll ask Charmin to come in here. Where are the gaps here, Charmin? How are we moving to fill these?
So I think that, well, from our experience with Dcash, we recognize that those are significant gaps, because even in our earlier consultations that we did with the financial institutions as we started out the Dcash journey, we recognize that even though we have, for example, all the banks are offering debit cards, for example, yet we have the banks will tell you that a number of their customers, they have the debit cards, they have merchants who accept debit cards, yet these individuals come to the ATMs, withdraw cash, and then go and do transactions, even though they can do a debit card. So I think we have recognized that there's
cash is part of the culture.
Yes, we have a cash culture, but so our conversation has to be about, before we even get to e-commerce, just digital payments in general. How do you get from where you are, from the cash-intensive society, to persons looking at how do you move away from cash to digital? So I think we have recognized that there's a big area that we have to focus on, which is why our marketing campaign, our public education campaign, is about persons understanding the whole digital realm, the benefits of it, the advantages of it, and how to get away from the cash intensive, from handling too much cash, the security concerns about handling cash, the cost of handling cash, because there's a cost attached to handling cash. Persons probably don't think about it every day, but there is a cost to handling cash. If you're a merchant, there's a cost of having to get a security officer to move the cash at the end of each shift to the banks. And I mean, there's the time to expect to reconcile the cash at the end of the day. Even the commercial banks, when you have the night banks coming in, you have to pay workers to collect that cash. So there's a cost to handling cash. And so the conversation has to start with how do you move away from cash into using digital payments, and then you shift it now to the e-commerce, because the e-commerce is at the next step beyond. So you start with a simple conversation about just digital payments in general. So that's what Dcash is. Even though Dcash has an e-commerce functionality, the first step to Dcash is about using digital cash as opposed to physical cash. So we're taking that first step. How do you start walking around? So instead of leaving home with a purse with bills in it, you just walk with your phone and all your cash is there. And we do know in our society, everybody walks with their phones.
So Charmin,
anything else.
The education piece in your Dcash drive, especially when it comes to businesses, are you spending some time, going through with businesses that the aspect about the cost of managing cash.
Yes, we are. We spend a lot of time.
The whole idea, not just on the cost side, but also the benefit side of gathering consumer data. When somebody makes a digital transaction, they're leaving a fingerprint, a digital fingerprint if you want,
Yes.
of who they are. You can profile them. You can see, you can match that transaction over a period of time. You can see the trends. What do they buy? How often do they buy this? I mean, are we spending time with businesses in your conversation piece, pushing the cash to sort of educate them and show them this is intelligence that you can't gather if people just leave cash. Cash is invisible to the person who's deposited.
Precisely. So our conversation has been around the benefits of using Dcash. So it gives you great efficiencies. So you can pull reports. You can pull these reports at the end of the day, at the end of a week, and you can sort them. You can use them to analyze, and then you can use this information now to make informed decisions for your business. Even those persons, as you mentioned before, Tony, in terms of those persons who may be unbanked, who don't have any records, you can know these persons normally have difficulty in terms of going to the bank for a loan because they don't have any records. You can now, using Dcash, you have all the transaction data readily available. You can now use this now to show, okay, over the last 6 months, this has been my transaction, this is what I have, and you can now do a proper business plan and go to a financial institution. So it makes it more marketable as well. So these are the benefits that we've been pushing to our merchants in particular in terms of how Dcash can help you. It can help you to gain information that you wouldn't normally have from all these cash transactions on a day-to-day basis.
I know we're dangerously run out of time here. This is quite an interesting conversation. I think Maurice, there's one further comment in the chat, or was that there before?
No, it's a comment, but I think it was already answered. The comment was from Galaxy by Far as to whether it is more costly to handle digital than physical cash, but I think Charmaine just answered that.
All right. Take us out to the break, and when we come back, we would continue to look at the pillars, the gaps, and how we're moving about filling these gaps.
Isn't it good to know that no matter where you are, you're covered? Covered by a company owned by Vincentions that understands your unique insurance needs. At Metrosint General Insurance Company, we've invested 50 years of service to guarantee that you have the peace of mind that you deserve. When it comes to motor vehicle, property, employer's liability, business insurance, and much more, we've got you covered. Our professional and friendly staff understands your needs and ensures you understand your options. Metrosint General Insurance Company.
This is Let's Get Down to Business, and we have a very knowledgeable panel with us this evening. We're talking about digital trade and e-commerce. Now, before we went on the break, we were looking at some of the gaps. We should continue to do that. What about data breaches, online security, system reliability? I'm not talking about the IT or the telecom provider system. I'm talking about the platforms that authenticate and so on. Are we satisfied that that part of the infrastructure is and the measures taken to mitigate data breaches and fraud and so on? Are we satisfied that where we operate within the OECS, we're paying full attention to that, and we can give the consumer and the business the confidence? Joel, I don't know if you want to take that up.
Well, Tony, anything I say on this would probably be anecdotal at best. But what I would say is, I guess we've had issues in the Eastern Caribbean with respect to cybersecurity issues. We've had even some government websites have been compromised over the years. There hasn't been, as far as I know, huge data breaches, as we've seen, for instance, a few months ago with Virgin Atlantic, where they had a data breach and millions of their customers' information was leaked. We know in the US, just maybe a week or two ago, there was a massive pipeline breach that created a major problem that had geopolitical connotations as well. And maybe one of the advantages of being small and almost invisible is that sometimes we are not always a target for these kinds of more nefarious activities online. And maybe that's a good thing. But ultimately, though, it really comes down to every business and every individual taking due care, exercising due care with respect to how they protect their information and their customers' information. And so that's going to call for a certain level of investment as well, in terms of ensuring that you are hiring persons who are very skilled in that area. And so when we talk about even business readiness, and we talk about even readiness with respect to education, how are we training enough people in these kinds of areas who can come back and contribute to our countries with respect to, because cybersecurity is also now part of national security. We have to see it in that way as well. And because it is part of national security, we have to do in the same way that we protect our borders in terms of when you're coming in at customs and so forth, and how we protect our seaports and all of that. It's the same way we need to protect our digital footprint as well. And so that's what I would say on that particular issue.
Let's move quickly on to financial and banking. Look at that ecosystem for supporting e-commerce. Regulations that allow for mobile payments. And I know, Shaman, you'd probably be able to contribute, you and Karim as well. And there's regulations that allow for electronic payments. Regulations that protect consumers on barriers to financing e-commerce ventures. We're not going to get through all of these. Better compatibility of online and mobile payment options, transaction fees, and building an environment of trust. That's quite a mouthful under this this whole pillar of financial and banking ecosystem. But let me kick off with you Sham, and pick up any one of those points you feel like.
So I will start with the infrastructure. So the payment system, as you know, the ECC is responsible for the payment system for the ECCU. And what we are doing right now is to undertake a project to modernize our payment system infrastructure, for the simple reason that we realize in the way things are going now, we have more fintech companies coming up, more digital companies coming up. And of course, the payment system legislation and regulations that are currently in place would not have adequately covered these. And so you find that when these small type businesses try to come on stream, they're hindrances, they're barriers, because they're being governed by the same requirements as these larger financial corporations. And so we are in a process now of modernizing our payment system legislation and infrastructure to facilitate these type of businesses. So we do recognize the need for it, and we have actually started the process to do that. Now, in terms of the banking sector, though, the transaction fees I spoke about, that was one of our motivations as well behind Dcash, because that's one of the greatest frictions that we currently have for persons being able to enjoy the full benefits of financial services. So you find
how is Dcash making this frictionless?
So basically, Dcash does not require a bank to make a transfer. So currently, if I want to transfer funds to somebody in St. Vincent, for example, or Grenada, so since we've launched in Grenada, then I would have to go through a bank and pay wire transfer fees up to $50, $60 to transfer $100, which defeats the purpose. With Dcash, once an individual, say in the case, has a Dcash wallet, they can transfer funds seamlessly to somebody in Grenada in 3 to 5 seconds. So it cuts down on the cost and the time, because sometimes it takes 2 to 3 days for the wire transfer to go through as well. And so that's what Dcash does. It removes that intermediary, as it were.
So I can send from my wallet to anybody's wallet in the OECS, right?
Yes.
And that does not go through a bank. That goes through your platform.
Yes.
Therefore, the person with the digital wallet does not have to have a bank account.
Well, we actually have two options. So we have currently, because we want to promote financial inclusion, we have an option where persons who don't currently have a bank account can still have a Gcash wallet. Those are onboarded through recall. We have approved agencies. So you can have a registered based wallet, which is through your financial institution. So you onboard through your financial institution and you transfer funds seamlessly from your account to your Gcash wallet and vice versa. But then once you have your funds in your Bcash wallet, you no longer have to go to your bank. It just goes from wallet to wallet. But recognizing that there are persons who don't have bank account, we have unbanked persons in our community, and our aim is to reach all ECCU citizens. We do have a value-based wallet where you don't have to go to a bank account. Once you fill in basic information, you're onboarded through our agencies, and then you can transact just like anybody else who has any kind of wallet. And so the important thing is to have your wallet set up, funded, and then you can transact easily, person to business, without intervention of a commercial bank.
Now, I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask Karim as well. Is Dcash squeezing out these other fintech small providers? We've got a couple on the ground here in St. Vincent. I'm sure there are many dotted in the other OECS countries, Sugar Pay and Antigua. Is Dcash going to squeeze these people out?
The intention is not to do that, because actually what we are offering post-pilot, and it will be tested during the pilot, where they currently for the pilot, ECCB offers or provides all the Dcash wallets. They can now post-pilot actually be the ones to provide Dcash wallets. So they can have branding guidelines, and they can then offer Dcash wallets. So it's an opportunity for them to offer their services via the Dcash wallet, because of the fact that Dcash is actually a substitute for physical cash, the fiat currency. Persons will tend to gravitate towards fiat currency. So what we encourage other businesses to do is to build on that platform. The ECCB has borne the cost of the infrastructure, so they don't have that basic infrastructural cost, which is a significant portion of these innovations. So we have the infrastructure there. They can now build on it. They can actually offer services. They can offer wallet services, or they can use the Dcash now to make payments to their platform. So there are opportunities available for these providers to use Dcash to their advantage and not see it as pushing it out, but actually an enabler to what they're trying to do.
Karen, what regulations are required to protect consumers?
No, I think the conversation is very good and very well placed, because when we speak about the MSME space, you have micro businesses within, for example, the agricultural space, who are not formalized, and not formalized simply means that they do not have bank accounts, they do not have the legal documents that require them to actually set up bank accounts. And it's not a surprising thing. The reality is we still have some sectors that are just unformalized. And I suspect what the ECCB is doing in itself is to really bring about a platform that can formalize these very micro businesses who obviously are out of the loop. It also brings confidence across the transacting of business and the ease of doing business. I recently read an article coming up from Africa where farmers who obviously would have a distance of possibly 1,000 miles away from the town center had a challenge in getting paid for their produce that they would have sold into these areas. And similarly, one of the non-cash wallet technologies arrived and basically ruled out the idea of transportation costs that would have basically negated the very transaction that would have cost them and earned them their salaries. So I think we're going into the right place. It's the right direction. In fact, I'm quite excited about the ECCB's intervention. And Charmaine, I'll put you on board, because we are going to contact you to have conversations and dialogue as to how we can help MSMEs to become better at what they do and to be better about doing business. And Charmaine, you raised the point before the break about having access to data, and sometimes being able to find funding for projects might be difficult for unformalized businesses, because they simply do not have the transaction history, because they actually just have a pure cash-based operation. They do not have the historic artifact that allows them to be able to be assessed, and they are stuck. And you're unable to now decide, boy, how is it that I'm intended to grow this business without having to meet the regulations and the application requirements of the bank? And I think Dcash, I think the idea of Dcash is well placed. It, as I said, it comforts the unformalized businesses and actually formalizes the transaction, allowing them to be part of the game changing atmosphere that innovation requires. So I'm very, very well pleased that the ECCB is going in that direction. No man left behind concept, and that's very, very placed in this time where e-commerce is becoming the bread and butter of MSMEs. So Tony, I think it's a longer, deeper conversation that has to continue. The dialogue is going to take a while. I know that we would like things to move at a faster pace. The reality is, I think if we just continue to open the dialogue to every single stakeholder who it's intended to impact, I think that's where we'll see the results, as opposed to having these closed door sessions where the people who are intending to help are not part of the conversation, so we do not understand what type of challenges that we are even seeking to assist them with. And on the back end, when we would have launch programs, then we realize, but this is not exactly what we wanted, because the people who were intended to help are not getting the benefits. So for me, dialogue is good, interventions are good, and it brings us right back to the cooperative conversation we had earlier. We need to partner a lot more. ECCB should not, conduct its transactions on its own. I think the OECS, has its mandate to ensure that we hold hands with the ECCB on this particular project. Similarly, we need to understand where the overall economic union is moving towards e-commerce and how aggressive we would like to be within that space.
And I endorse that 100%. Joel, I want us to look at the question I asked about the consumer protection. What redress does the consumer have if something goes wrong with a transaction, or if my money that I have in a digital wallet, I am ready to redeem it and I can't. I need to cash it out, as it were. Okay, that's part of the regulations that I'm not sure where we are in the OECS region. So I don't know if you can comment on that.
Okay, thanks, Tony. In the case of Dcash, because it's coming from the ECCB,
yes,
they're underwriting it.
Correct.
So it's a situation where the regulator is also the provider, I suppose, and so that takes care of the regulatory concern that you have, Tony, specific to Dcash. Right, but if we're talking about other payments, other solutions, the issue of trust is an important one. I know there's some OECS countries, for instance, I'm not sure how far their cybersecurity legislation goes, or in terms of consumer protection. If they don't go far enough, then, or even our consumer legislation, some of them may have been crafted before the digital era really came into force. So it might be a need for us to go back to revising those pieces of legislation to ensure that we are capturing consumer protection within the digital space. But of course, regulators are going to need to have that element of trust with respect to the providers, and consumers are going to need that as well. And so there's going to have to be some kind of a regulatory solution, both nationally and coming from the ECCB as well. What exactly that solution is, I am not sure, because we have to also make sure that we're in a position where we can do our due diligence with respect to the solutions that are emerging, to ensure that we are also not running afoul of any kind of other international obligations we may need to meet. We have to ensure that persons are not using these platforms to engage in criminal activity and those sort of things. So those are things that I think would have to be ironed out. The ECCB has an advantage because as regulator, you sort of would know what you need to do in that regard.
Chairman, if you want to further comment on that, I have a couple of questions I want to go ahead.
I was going to comment and say, I think what it comes down to as well is having standards. I think we have to establish some minimum standards that would guide these conversations. That way we can be sure that when we're doing legislation across the countries, that they all conform to at least a basic standard that we know. And then in setting these standards as well, we have to look at the international markets. So we don't want to set a standard that is not compatible, or we can't compete internationally because our standards are too low. So I think where we have to start from is setting standards, minimum standards for these type of operations, and then build on that. I think that is where we need to push for.
And if I may, very, very quickly, Tony, because I think where the ECCB is going, it's going to help us resolve a systemic concern we've had in recent years with respect to the loss of correspondent banking relationships with the United States. So, for example, if in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I'm doing business with in Antigua and Barbuda, and I have to wire money, that still has to go through a U.S. financial intermediary. And because of the challenges we've been having in that regard, I think this DCAS solution is going to help us to bypass some of those challenges. So just saying that to applaud the initiative.
There is a World Bank project, which I know has been launched here in St. Vincent, but it's also a feature in at least 3 other OECS territories, the Digital Transformation Project. And while my limited knowledge of it, while I think it's government-centric in that a lot of it speaks to address governments enabling of their way of doing e-commerce transactions and interfacing with the people who do business with government digitally. I want to ask Karim, what collaboration exists with the work that you're doing at the competitive business unit and this particular project? How are you getting synergies there? How are you not duplicating efforts? Are you on board with the project? Because it's a fairly sizable project.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. No, it's quite a sizable project, and in fact, one of the senior technical specialists who work under my guidance is working alongside consultants, multi-island collaborations to drive that project. So there is a national level conversation of the digitalized project from the World Bank, and then there's a regional component. So the CBU actually is leading the charge on the regional component, which filters down through the national piece of that project. And in essence, the project at this stage is really at where we are actually developing the capacity component of the project. So consultants are engaging both national and at both regional levels to discuss how can we build capacity across the Caribbean to understand how digital is going to help enabling the environment. And you're right, it's a bit of heavy on transactions on the government side, but the fact of the matter is every single citizen is going to benefit from that advancement.
Most definitely, because government is a massive trading block, if you want.
And service provider. Service
provider is probably more what I meant.
Yeah, no, and you're quite right place to say that, because yes. The COVID pandemic has unfortunately exposed us all in not being ready or not being ready. And the conversations has been, see how quickly it allowed some businesses to turn the page from traditional to right? E-readiness. And I think we have been forced to push the button on the acceleration in terms of getting the project off the ground and getting the project into a space where we are ready to really see realizations year on year. Now, this is a massive project. It's not going to happen overnight. It's happening in phases. And I think what we want to ask the Caribbean region to do, and every citizen has to play a part, is, get on board with the capacity building, get on board in understanding the project. The project scope is available for all to read. It's available on our OECS.org website. And I think once you understand what your role could be within that entire project and how could you benefit just as a citizen, I think we're going to be better for it. And we speak about being able to transact custom operations online. We speak about being able to carry out all our activities from immigration, from passport renewal.
Your driver's license.
Your driver's license.
I forgot to renew mine, and I got a ticket for that.
And you got a ticket because you were unable to do that from your home, right?
Well, there's a bit of that too,
So the CBU is well placed, and we're in the throes of the conversation. In fact, we are hosting a consultation By the end of the month, we are discussing with 5 member states and asking member states, in essence, to comment on key enablements of that project. And there is also another program that speaks to building capacity for a digitized economy, which is separate and apart from the World Bank project. Again, donor funded, a massive amount of investment is being poured in, and a consultation also exists for that project readiness. There is a project that speaks to the developing a digitized marketing plan for agro and creative industries, MSMEs. Also, the intention, and that project will benefit not only the English-speaking members of the OECS space, but also Guadeloupe and Martinique. And what we do, 50 MSMEs will benefit from that specific project in capacity enhancement, capacity building for a digitized economy. And in essence, we are helping them through a digitized marketing plan, a digitized strategy, and a digitized implementation of their strategic guidance. So Tony, there's a lot of work going on.
Thanks, Gary. I'm going to have to cut you short, but I get the point. We're running down close to our end time. I want to give Shaman 30, 45 seconds to just tell me again in that space what Dcash is, what it's going to deliver, and maybe that's your final words, and then I'll go to Joel for his final comments.
So Dcash is a digital version of our EC currency, and it's going to offer benefits to customers, individuals, and businesses in particular, where you can actually load your funds onto your digital wallet, and you can make payments person to person, person to business, business to business, person to governments, and governments to individuals. So what it is a seamless transfer. You take away all the frictions of having to go through commercial banks or credit unions. You can transfer from your wallet to another wallet. We are heading to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, so we've launched in Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Kitts and Nevis. And we're in the middle of our implementation to roll out to St. Vincent by the second week in July. So we'll be having a slew of marketing and public education activities over the next 3 or 4 weeks to make sure that persons understand what Dcash is and persons get excited and energized to go out and sign up for Dcash and use Dcash. We're going to have our merchant ecosystem and our financial institution ecosystem, to facilitate this. I just want to close by saying this is a collaborative effort. I think 2 things that was stressed today is about collaboration and capacity building. And so we are focusing heavy on the capacity building, but I think it's important to recognize as a region, we have to collaborate and coordinate if we're going to move the region as a whole in this digital sphere.
Thank you, Shaman. Joel, you have the final words. We're actually like a minute over time, but I bear in mind that you are now 2 o'clock in the morning in Geneva. And so I know you're going to be very brief. You want to hit your bed. So take us out.
Yes, for sure. And thanks. Tony, I just want to thank you for the invitation, and thanks to Maurice as well, co-host. And I'm very excited about some of the things that young people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines are doing in the digital space. And my final word is that the future is digital. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank my panelists on behalf of my co-host, Maurice Franklin. This has been another edition of Let's Get Down to Business. We'll be back here on IKTV 2 weeks from now with a new topic. And I assure you that the faces you've seen this evening, you will see them again from time to time. Thank you very much for viewing.
Thank you.
Isn't it good to know that no matter where you are, you're covered? Covered by a company owned by Vincentions that understands your unique insurance needs. At Metrocint General Insurance Company, we've invested 50 years of service to guarantee that you have the peace of mind that you deserve. When it comes to motor vehicle, property, employer's liability, business insurance, and much more, we've got you covered. Our professional and friendly staff understands your needs and ensures you understand your options. Metrocint General Insurance Company.